when one is in the company of women as accomplished as yourselves, I think there is pretty much nothing here that you all already don't know or that I could perhaps share with you. But sometimes, in my opinion, by virtue of being women, by virtue of being multitaskers in this incredible environment that we live and thrive in, we have all the answers. But often hearing somebody else speak them out aloud can perhaps be that moment of catalysm where you feel that this is what I was looking for. So I'm hoping to be that bit of a catalyst today to set some thoughts going and maybe have even some food for thought. Decoding the success mantra. You know, I thought I'd start by, of course, introducing myself, while Kamini has very eloquently said very fine things about me. I just introduced myself as somebody who's lived each day out every day, because it has to be recalibrated. There could be a landslide in your path, and then what do you do? So it's a good idea to know your destination, or as Google markers will call waypoints. You may be heading to position X via Y, Z, L, M, N, O, P. But how you're going to go between those waypoints is a fluid situation, which is why one can never plan too much. But that doesn't mean that we should live in an environment which is devoid of planning. So that's me. I think why there is a need to have conversations like these, and I'd like to congratulate the ladies in this room for making that effort to facilitate dialogue, because the more such conversations we are a part of, the more subjects we discuss, we will eventually, if not in our generation, then the generation that follows us, be able to have real change. And maybe the things that we fought for, somebody else will reap the benefits of. But the fact that we may not reap the benefits is not reason for us to not fight for those things. My desire of an outcome may not necessarily match that of Kamini or of somebody else sitting in this room, but is the desired outcome from that perspective that eventually defines success. Let me elaborate this a little bit more. While of course, when you break it down to absolute practical terms and say, okay, you need to get more than 35 marks or you fail, and then success means getting more than 35% in an exam. But when you remove the formal environment of, say, education, where pass fail are realities, and you move into the real world, I think the definition of success begins to undergo a massive change. What I set for my goals, only I know. Unless, of course, I share them, say, with my life partner, which I think everybody should, because ultimately that is the most robust partnership all of us are ever going to have in our lives. So say you set a set of goals for yourself, and only you can measure the desired outcome, because only you know what you desire and what your goal is. So essentially, the need to first have a goal is very, very important, because without a goal, you can't really chase anything. And the goal could be as lofty as climbing Mount Everest. Literally, that's the highest goal you can have on planet Earth. Or it could be learning cross stitch, which most of us are taught either at home or in school if you take needlework. But the point is, you have to set a goal for yourself. And I think the pressure that we put ourselves under to try and bring about outcomes that may be synonymous with somebody else's desire is where the trouble starts. For example, when somebody studies to be a doctor, his goal may be to be the best GP in Banjara Hills. Now, that's his goal, and maybe he's achieved that. But because he has not become Naresh Trehan, the leading cardiac surgeon of this country, is he a failure? No. So I'm going to give a few examples to highlight how our definition and view of success is very skewed, and without even questioning what success means, we have taken what other people have defined to be success and started perhaps putting ourselves, our children, our friends, and anybody who may work with us and for us under immense pressure and duress. So just because a doctor whose own goal may in fact not even be as lofty as being the best GP in Banjara Hills. Maybe he just wants to be a doctor who helps people's lives. Now that's his goal. But he may be judged on the yardstick which is as diverse as Christian Bernard, the man who performed the first heart transplant, to Naresh Trehan, who's a sort of more, how shall I say, Indianized version of that. Is he a failure because he hasn't become Naresh Trehan? I don't think so. When somebody chooses to perhaps be a lawyer, and maybe his goal is just to earn a respectable living, but because he hasn't become Harish Salve, Arima Sundaram, Arun Jaitley, is he a failure? Because ultimately success is largely linked to a goal that you set for yourself. I wrote a column some years ago when I was very disturbed by Jia Khan herself being led to take her own life. Was the environment she thrived in. So she came to be an actor, and the fact that she was able to run a house, live in Mumbai and earn a living, in my opinion, was a success. But if we are going to judge her, firstly, no one should be judging anyone in an ideal world, but we don't live in utopia. We live in a real world, so judgments are part and parcel of how we operate. The environment that she was in, rather she found herself in, was living up to others' ideas of success. So being constantly told, oh, you're not doing well enough. I'm not saying this is what exactly happened, but I'm just trying to give you another perspective of a profession that I know intimately. Just because you're not Aishwarya Rai or Katrina Kaif, are you a failure? The fact that you have come to a city which you don't belong to, you're managing, and it's a city where the cost of living is the highest in this country. You're managing to survive, do well for yourself. Does somebody have the right to disturb you enough for you to think that you're a failure because you've not become Aishwarya or Katrina or Karina? Now, this is something that perhaps a function of people allowing other people to set their goals for them. And it's a very, very extreme example, but I thought I'd talk about it because letting other people run your agenda is always a recipe for disaster. Not to say that you shouldn't listen to your parents, and I think if there were any young girls here whose mothers were here, I would have loved to maybe have a bit of a chat with them. It doesn't mean disrespecting your parents, as mothers in this room will agree with, but it does mean that you have to decide what it is that you want, and that is the starting point of any journey. Now, when you've decided what your goal is, then you are the person only who's qualified to evaluate. Because while it's also easy to digress and say, oh, I'm very happy where I am, when you haven't even set a goal for yourself. So if you set a goal for yourself, and when you periodically check your progress on that goal, is when you can have that conversation with yourself or with your partner and assess whether there's been progress or not. And every goal doesn't have to be achieved, but if you don't have any goals, then the idea of success becomes elusive and vague. Therefore, whatever the goal may be, I think it's all about setting new goals for yourself. Today, the goal could be, I want to learn jiu-jitsu. And once you've learned it, you don't have to become the master in the country and lead and become a champion where you earn various categories of belts. But it's yours, it's your goal, and only you are entitled to judge your success. Suppose your goal is, I want to be a great mother. That's a goal a lot of us have. But I think it's important for us to put parameters and evaluate what constitutes that particular goal being met, because there is another person who's part of that goal, which is your child, who may or may not share your ideas about what they consider their success, indirectly yours. So I think the fundamental mantra number one, if I had to say, would be success is individual. And you have to set your own goals, and you have to assess. Life is about going from goal to goal to goal, otherwise we will stagnate and just be animal. The second thing that's really important in achieving the kind of success that gives you contentment, happiness, joy and peace is that every action of ours is essentially a choice. And the moment you're aware of that, you can stop blaming your circumstances. Because a lot of us around us will blame the circumstances that are around us and probably resulted in us taking a certain course of action. The fact that there's always a choice. I think it's an important time to maybe address something which a lot of us have read a lot about in the newspaper, which is the Me Too campaign. I fundamentally believe you always have a choice. And this is not to say that I in any manner disrespect women who've chosen to speak out years after they faced a situation where they were perhaps forced to compromise on their ideals. Ultimately, I just want to leave you with one thought on that. There's always a choice. When you want to take the argument further and say, but that choice meant that I could not get that job or I wouldn't survive, well, you re-examine it one step back. Your choice of that profession is also a choice. If your principles mean so much to you and you feel that compromising on them is not good enough for you, then maybe choosing that profession may not be the best answer. Again, I am not in those shoes. I've never been in that shoe because I fundamentally believe somebody is going to put you in a position where you might be made to make that choice. That environment is something you have a degree of control over. And if you inadvertently end up encouraging the environment, inadvertently, and as women we are in a constant world of predators. Sometimes actions we are not even aware of may encourage the environment where somebody may actually put that choice on top of us. We always have a choice, and I think that is that message we need to give to people who perhaps are facing it right now across professions. So if you're in a bank and you're in a position where you might become a Me Too candidate, what should you do? Should you resign and leave and maybe not have a source of income? Is that a difficult? Of course, it's a difficult choice to make. Taking legal recourse, it's a harder choice to make, but ultimately, it is a choice. And here's the thing that I've always lived by. When in doubt about which choice to make, choose to be a role model, because in doing so, you'll end up doing the right thing. And when you do the right thing, maybe you will not be the winner in the short term, but you're making the right decision and choosing the right outcome will perhaps empower a significant number of people who are on the fence about a position you may want to take. So whenever in doubt over any choice, always choose to be a role model, because this is something that has always helped me. It could be something as small as facing incompetence in an environment that you can't control. You can choose to fly off the handle and say, you know what, I've paid for this service, I expect the best. Or you could take a more graceful position and say the same thing in a manner which will perhaps have other people look up to you and say, oh, you know, she handled this so well. Like anything else, I think what's also important to mention here is that we need to be aware as women that we operate in a highly patriarchal environment. When I say patriarchal environment, I mean pretty much there is a course of action that has been decided for women. No one's asked the women this course of action, but it's been decided for them. So when people ask me what are my views on 33% reservation for women, I don't take a straightaway position, because I'm learning the ropes of politics, and politicians never take positions. We know that. But I actually throw the question back at the person and say, so how much reservation have we had for men so far? And you know what the answer to that is? 100%. So much so that whatever it is that you see, it is assumed that it's the man's world. Now, I'm not somebody who says you must be militant about it and be negative about it and be aggressive about it. We need to be aware at all points of time that we operate in a man-first world, sometimes without even realizing within our own families. In a man-first world, empowerment isn't about creating jobs for women. For me, the meaning of empowerment is changing the way people think. And I don't believe any kind of budgetary allocation is going to do that unless the intent is to change the way we think. For example, textbooks of NCERT, even today, in some places where state boards continue to be the defining authority of education. In the social studies textbook or environmental science textbook, there is dad goes to office and mom goes to the kitchen. Roles like these are defined at a very young age. Now, this is because we're operating in a man-first environment. In a man-first or a patriarchal environment, what needs to be really done is constantly hammer this message out. A boy and a girl are first individuals. And putting them in boxes of a boy should study science, be doctor, engineer, lawyer, and a girl should do arts, humanities, commerce, because is perhaps furthering it. No amount of special investment is going to change that. No amount of special investment for the girl child is going to change that unless we attack the root of the problem, which is where by default men have and boys have the right of way. How can something like that be done? Well, the government and all governments have control over dissemination of information through something like All India Radio, through Doordarshan and all of that. We need a campaign of the level of pulse polio, and the level, by level I mean the length of the campaign. It's been going on for over 20 years and still polio is just reaching a stage of eradication. There was a case or two reported a few years ago in Meerut district, if I'm not mistaken. Could be wrong there. But it took us 20 years is when I remember the campaign running. I'm sure it predates 20 years. We need a campaign of the level of polio eradication or eradication of TB to impart in people's minds that boys and girls are actually equal. And the government has the means for doing that. So, just like the government is making sure that TB is eradicated so that drug-resistant TB, which is when you give up your TB medication halfway and then the TB that remains is drug-resistant and that can be passed on to others and the conventional antibiotics won't help. That message is being hammered again and again via radio, via print, via TV. That level of hammering of the message that boys and girls are equal. Not that you should treat your daughters like your son. You should treat your daughters like an individual who has the right to do whatever it is she wants to do. Because that is real empowerment and that needs commitment, and that needs commitment across the political spectrum. Today it's this government, tomorrow it may still be this government, but day after it surely won't be this government. What then? Will this whole project fall apart? So fundamentally all of us have a responsibility to make sure we challenge stereotypes wherever we can. We can't control the government's campaign mechanism, maybe one day, but right now no. But whenever we see a stereotype in action is when we must challenge it. Just because some of us may already be victims of stereotyping, a lot of us are, and it's because circumstances sometimes were such that maybe we didn't have the awareness of being able to make a choice. I'm sure there is everybody in this room at some point of time or the other who has been a victim of the gender stereotype. It may have happened. I think it's important to be aware that it's happened. Because if you're not aware that it's happened, you can't go about trying to make sure it doesn't happen to others. And remember, gender stereotyping is perhaps the most common thing. So what do I do about it? Whenever I see somebody being sexist or saying, oh, you know, women shouldn't do this, I don't pick a fight. I don't put on my armor and take out my talwar and start having a fight. I make a joke about it, but I let that person know that you can't decide for me what I need to do or for other women. And I think as women, like the ones in this room, we have a responsibility because we are able to make choices in this room that are dreams for millions and millions and millions of women in this country. So this power that we have of being able to exercise some choices must be exercised because we owe it to other people. I've always used every opportunity to try and raise this because I feel the greatest strength of a woman is that she has the ability to empower other women. Having said that, in a man-first world, you are taught to compete with other women because the patriarchal structure makes you want to compete for the right rishta. So all of us are like, we're going to get that. I mean, I'm saying not now, but in our heads, the conditioning is such that the best day of your life is the day you're going to get married. Do we raise our sons like that? We don't. And then the next best day is when you're going to have a baby. We don't raise our sons to say the best day of your life is going to be when you have a baby. No, we say that'll be a cool thing to happen for you, but go out there, become the CEO of your company, do all of that, be a top lawyer, be a top engineer. The man-first environment makes us compete with each other without us even realizing it. So say you belong to a certain caste, from a certain community, there are X number of eligible girls. And then there are 2 or 3 eligible bachelors. All those X girls and their mothers are competing for that 2-3 boys, because that's the environment that's been created. It's a competitive environment. It's a hyper competitive environment. In the workplaces, sometimes we'll see that instead of women being empathetic to another woman, they end up cold shouldering them. So somebody says, I had a really rough night because my baby was up with colic all night and I haven't slept. Instead of saying, I know, I've been there too, hang in there, deal with it, we all have been through it. That's the difference. The default setting of women is to empower each other, and in my opinion, the moment you've empowered somebody, you are sure shot on your way to success. It's one of my goals, and that's a goal I succeed in every time, because I have decided that I am going to empower at least one person every day. It may just be by allowing them to question what is happening around them, but that is a goal that I have. I mean, of course, the idea is that while we have goals and while we must chase them and while we must assess our progress, I like to believe a little bit of the Bhagavad Gita doesn't do any harm to anyone. So you should put in the effort, but perhaps not be so attached to the fruit of your labor. I know it's sort of paradoxical. Some people may not even know what the outcome is that you were looking for. But being focused on the outcome is perhaps not the us. I've spent a lot of time talking about setting goals, being aware of the choices we make, because those are functions of the success that you believe you have attained. Not everybody else, because there comes a time when you have to stop living for other people. It could be running a house, it could be XYZ. But ultimately, you are the one who gets to decide what is your success, because it's your choice. Focusing on the big picture, which is the goal, is actually most important, whatever the goal may be. When in a box, I think one mantra is to unbox it. So typically, we will find ourselves at work, at home, pushed into a corner. Sometimes because of our gender, can really help. And by opening the box up, I mean two things. One is examining what exactly it is that you're doing there. Sometimes we are so involved in any given situation that we don't know that we are boxed. And the second thing is to ask for help. Because when you're in a box, maybe you need a hand up to come out of the box. And often we don't ask for help as much as we should. And in that, I'd like to again come back to the fact that only women can best empower other women. So if in a tight box, reach out to a friend, reach out to a girlfriend, lady friend, whatever it is you'd like to call, your sister, because only she will get you, because you are handling so much more than perhaps your partner is. And that is the nature of being female and trying to be successful. To close, I have 3 things to say before I'm going to go over to Kamini. One is, anything you set your heart on, be prepared, and this is something that that Malcolm Gladwell said. It's the 10,000 hour rule. The 10,000 hour rule essentially says that over and above your regular whatever it is that you do. So if you're a full-time mom and a homemaker, or if you're an entrepreneur, or if you work in an organization, that doesn't count. Above that, the extra that you do. So for example, if you're a mom and you want to make sure that your kids excel somewhere, I mean that's a very, very good goal to have. How will you go over and above the base? Over and above the base might mean waking up 2 hours early in the morning, might mean taking kids for squash practice, swimming practice. Those hours are adding up. So let's say a typical work day, and let there be no doubt that whether you're a homemaker and a full-time mom, or an entrepreneur, or somebody who does a job, it is a full 8 to 10 hour work day. Anything over above those 8 to 10 hours that you put in for work, whatever category of work you may be in, that when it reaches 10,000 hours is going to be a leap up. Now what that passion is, you have to decide. But a little bit extra is required to excel. So I'll give a personal example on 10,000 hours, which is, of course, it did not take me 10,000 hours to get a pilot's license. But I do many things in addition to being an actor and an entrepreneur. And sometimes I wonder, why am I doing all this? This extra time that I'm struggling to find, that my day is already packed. In my case, I don't necessarily define the goal, and which is something which goes contrary to what I just spoke of, because I'm hoping the moment I leave this room, I start defining a goal, because we all have an answer, but sometimes you need to hear others say it, and sometimes even yourself say it. Every 10,000 hours that you spend will make you go up somewhere. Now, in my kind of a life, what does that mean? It means the growth of brand Gul. Because in the business that I am, when I walk into a boardroom and ask for money for one of my companies from a bunch of investors, that person needs to feel like if I don't give her money, I'm losing out. So, how do I'm giving you my personal mantra. I am not a CEO. I founded 3 companies, they're doing quite okay, no complaints there. I hands-on run a production company, so on and so forth. But the extra that I do over and above that is my investment in brand Gul. Because for me, the biggest currency is how people view me. And again, it doesn't mean that I'm affected by what people think of me, but essentially what does brand Gul stand for? So over the last 18 years that I have been in showbiz, I have consciously or subconsciously worked 10,000 hours twice over to put in that time in brand Gul. From somebody else's perspective, brand Gul could be somebody who did some few average movies, critically acclaimed type, maybe didn't become Katrina, so she's a failure there. That's their problem. It doesn't bother me. Somebody could say, oh, but she didn't do much here. I mean, what's a couple of $1 million we raised for a technology company when, Silicon Valley and why go far, Hyderabad is brimming with investment. But here's the thing, they don't know what my goals are. And I like to keep my goals close to my chest. But for the purpose of this conversation, I'd like to highlight that when you set up who you are and in your head what you stand for, everything you do over and above basic. So if I just chose to be an actor, then I could just operate in the little limited environment that I operate in. But if I want to look back as somebody who is, what does brand Gul today stand for? Brand Gul stands first and foremost, if I can say so without being immodest, is credibility and authenticity and honesty. That to me is the most important currency I've gained, whether it's through my pursuit of fitness or putting my money where my mouth is, walking the talk, talking the walk, whatever you call it. And be somebody who remains relevant. And relevant is the operative word in this hyper over-commuted environment that we live in. There's social media, there's real media, and there's all of that. Is how do I make sure that brand Gul is relevant? And that's where my investment goes. I did not get a PPL license to be relevant. It's something I wanted to do, but it does add to my brand. I have people asking me, how did you find the time to become a pilot? And I tell you, there were days I wanted to cry. There was just no time, the exams were intense, managing schedules where it was so easy to skip and say, oh, you know what, now I'm going to go and I can't do this anymore. I know a lot of hobby pilots who've started flying but given up because managing a day job and trying to learn how to fly without wanting to become a pilot as a profession became a bit of a challenge. So ultimately, 10,000 hours is what it takes to lose yourself from the rat race and rise above. I'm not trying to be pompous here. My point is, this is what you all need to evaluate and figure out what are your goals, where can you put those additional 10,000 hours towards your children, towards your business, towards your family. Lastly, and this is the most important part, I cannot stress enough the importance of fitness. So typically when I walk in somewhere, typically to give a fitness talk, Kamini, people will say, oh, is running all you do? And my answer is no, running is what lets me do all that I do. Because when you are fitter and you outlast your colleague who is perhaps not fit. I'll give you the example of my election campaign. In terms of hours on the campaign trail, now I was fortunate that in the last Lok Sabha, the 4 seats that the entire media seemed to be obsessed with were Amethi, Banaras, Amritsar and Chandigarh. Chandigarh is a sleepy little town, no one cares what happens, that's a union territory. The MP doesn't even have any real power because Chandigarh, like every union territory, is run by the bureaucracy. Having said that, for some reason, the media took a fancy to Chandigarh. I had 2 colleagues who were contenders for the same seat, Madam Kiran Kher and Mr. Pawan Bansal, very respected senior congressman. One is they were much older, so there's no running away from that. But in terms of the number of hours I put on the campaign trail, I could only do 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. till the official campaigning hours end because I was just so much fitter. I had done the whole of Chandigarh 3 times over in terms of every single ward and part of my constituency. Now, of course, the outcome of the election perhaps was not desirable for me. But that's not the point in this case, this example that I'm trying to make. When you're fitter, you're able to beat stress. When you're fitter, you have greater bandwidth. So without fitness, we are operating on edge. Remember before 2G and 3G, there was edge E in our phones. Without fitness, you're operating on E. And with fitness, you're operating on 4G. That's the difference. And anybody who regularly exercises here in this room, please raise your hand and tell me how you feel after your exercise. Nobody exercises, come on, come on. See? So, you know the feeling you get after your exercise? That feeling is what resets everything. And I think whatever it is you do, it makes you more efficient at doing that. Many hours playing tennis. But say you have modest goals. The time that you put into your exercise regimen comes back to you fourfold in terms of productivity. So we know in an 8-hour day, we're not actually productive for all the 8 hours. We probably have a 2-hour window when we are hyper productive and then we're just doing the grunt work of maybe answering mails and doing all of that. When you exercise, whatever time it is that you invest in exercise comes back to you fourfold. So if your existing productivity is 2 hours, comes up by that many number of minutes that you put into your exercise. So that to me is the final last but not the least takeaway that I wanted to share about what I think are my mantras for success. But of course, success is individual. It's what you define. Thank you for being such a patient audience. I really appreciate the time. Deeply grateful to all of you for taking our time from what is certainly a busy schedule on a Monday and to be here to hear me speak. Thank you once again. I'm very grateful. Thank you.